I've been having a great time making these videos, and I was very happy to receive my first request to cover a specific Agatha Christie novel, comparing it to its TV adaptation, Taken at the Flood, which happens to be one of my favorite Poirot stories. It was published in 1948 and is also titled There is a Tide. The adaptation starring David Suchet came out in 2006. Let's dive in. Taken at the Flood is one of the what I'm going to call Knives Out type murder mysteries where the victim is a matriarch or patriarch and the suspects are mostly family members. Although this one is a little bit different. The patriarch in this case, Gordon Claude, is not a murder victim. Instead, he's a victim of the London Blitz. Gordon has always been absolutely generous toward his family with his money. They could have been a little more thrifty, but Gordon liked having them dependent on him so much that he encouraged them to not save. Everyone, including Gordon, expected that his fortune would pass on to his family when he died, but when he was killed by a German bomb shortly after he eloped, the money went to his widow instead. So, in short, we have the Claude family, Gordon's brothers, Jeremy and Lionel, their wives, Frances and Catherine, Gordon's sister Adela, his niece Lynn, and his nephew Rowley, all of whom covet the money now possessed by Rosaline Claude, who is apparently under the thumb of her brother David Hunter. Some suspect that David is actually her lover, but eventually it's confirmed he is Rosaline's brother. The story centers on Lynn, who is engaged to marry Rowley, but she finds herself increasingly attracted to David. David, in turn, begins to have feelings for Lynn, but because she's set on marrying Rowley, he takes out his frustration on the rest of the Claudes, who are desperate for money. When they come to Rosaline asking for loans, David steps in and says they won't be getting anything. Rosaline is a complete fish out of water with her newfound wealth, and this antagonism between David and the Claudes frightens her. David says she's right to be frightened, for if she were to die, the money would all revert to the Claudes, giving them a ripe motive for murder, but he swears he'll protect her. A mysterious stranger arrives in town, going by the name of Enoch Arden, a reference to a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, implying that Arden is really Robert Underhay, Rosaline's first husband, presumed dead, but if not, then her marriage to Gordon is invalid, and her claim to his money is toast. Arden threatens David with blackmail. The threat is overheard by the innkeeper, who passes the news on to Rowley, setting off a chain reaction of events. As you might have noticed, Poirot takes no part in any of this, though he did actually appear twice early on in the book. Once during World War II, when a man named Major Porter told him about his friend Robert Underhay possibly faking his death, and was overheard by Jeremy Claude, and once in a flash forward when Catherine Claude tried to hire Poirot to find Underhay, and thereby return Gordon's money to the family. When Enoch Arden is found dead by blunt force trauma, you can be sure Poirot is about to make a reappearance. On to the film. The first big change is that the film story is not set in 1946, but in the 1930s. But wait, then how does Gordon Claude die if not by...
Gas.
Oh, really?
Blew the front off Gordon's house.
Ah, okay. What's also different is that they have all the Claudes, minus Lynn, gathered in front of the house to witness the explosion. After Major Porter's exposition scene, it's established that Poirot was apparently friends with Lynn's late father, so he's something of a godfather to Lynn. Lynn returns not from the war, but from missionary work or something in Africa. Poirot has just moved into a new apartment and his first client is...
Mrs. Catherine Woodward.
Wait, what?
Lynn's aunt. Lynn's mother, Adela, and I are Gordon Claude's sisters. Did you not get my letter?
Okay, so they've changed up the familial relationships a bit. I wonder why. Oh, maybe to make Lynn's engagement to Rowley a little less gross, if they're not cousins anymore.
She's engaged to be married.
No.
Cousin of hers, in fact. Rowley. He's a Claude.
Never mind. So far, the adaptation overall is quite faithful to the original story. Except when it's not. Rosaline is now getting obscene phone calls, calling her a slut and...
You do it with a corpse!
Oh my. Rowley's attitude toward Lynn is not quite the same. In the book, his fiancée joined the war effort and came home a hero, so she's a constant reminder to him that he stayed safe at home, while others risked their lives, including his best friend, who was killed. Even though he loves her, being around her exacerbates his grief and his shame. Since the film is pre-war, his discomfort toward Lynn comes from the fact that she's become worldly.
You're kissing me and you're thinking, I don't even know if she's still a virgin.
So they've reduced his character depth to male fragility. That's a little less compelling. The film's biggest loss is basically what the whole book was about, the struggle of trying to get used to this new world everyone found themselves in after the end of World War II. Maybe the Nazi threat was over, but there was still chaos and ill will everywhere. Agatha Christie did a good job of capturing that, and the film just tosses it away. My last complaint is about a very forced coincidence early on. Having read the book, I know Poirot becomes acquainted with the Clodes as a result of his encounter with Major Porter. But here he meets Major Porter, and he's already acquainted with them. Oh, but maybe the Clodes introduced Poirot to the Major on purpose.
Porter is an ocean-going bore with his story about my brother Gordon. He can't have known you're acquainted with us Clodes.
Okay. I'm done trying to give the film the benefit of the doubt. Returning to the book, the suspicious death of Enoch Arden is investigated by Superintendent Spence, who would later return in several other Poirot novels. Rowley fills him in on the man's money extortion scheme against both David and the Clodes. Rosaline views the body and says it is not her first husband, Robert Underhay. But then Rowley hires Poirot, who finds Major Porter, who says it is Underhay. This makes David the prime suspect. Before they arrest him, David says something to Rosaline, which is another example of an important clue from the book that they leave out of the film. He says, "Stick to your story that the dead man is not Underhay." I'll explain later why this is important. Poirot begins to see a pattern right away. He begs Rosaline to let him help her, but she refuses. Lionel doesn't think the bloody fire tongs are the right shape for the murder weapon. A hotel guest says she glimpsed a woman with Arden in his room the night of the murder, at a time that gives David an alibi. Major Porter is the next to die. It looks like suicide, but suspiciously there's no note. Then Frances confesses that Arden was really her cousin Charles. She and Charles had conspired to blackmail David. She was dumbfounded when Porter identified Charles as Underhay. Poirot and Lynn go to check on Rosaline. They find that she's died in her sleep. David accuses the Clodes of having murdered his sister to get their hands on the fortune, but Spence theorizes that Rosaline was the woman seen in the first victim's hotel room, and that she killed him, and then committed suicide. However, Poirot says that of these three deaths, one was murder, one was suicide, and one was an accident. So, which was which? The film gives us pretty much the same sequence of events, with some awkward attempts at humor, and with at least one noticeable change in every scene. For example, Lynn says of David,
I need him. Even if he beat me, I would kiss his hands and love him.
"Eh." They're trying really hard to make us uncomfortable. It's like watching Broadchurch, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just not the right fit for a Poirot story. So then we get to Porter's death. Holy shit! Did he just... I guess they didn't want it ambiguous about it being suicide? Jesus. In the film, instead of the mysterious woman, it's Lynn who gives David his alibi, and they make a huge deal about it. Then, finally, Poirot and Lynn discover Rosaline What in the... Oh! They save her. Well, that's nice, I guess. And then it's very confusing. David seems to think Lynn tried to kill Rosaline, even though she's sitting right there, helping her. Poirot says Rosaline attempted suicide, but that someone deliberately allowed her access to the morphine David usually keeps locked up. She's an addict. And it's unclear whether he's saying someone did it or that David did it. And then there's this weirdness. Can I go back to the book, please? Lynn tells Rowley she's leaving him for David. To her surprise, Rowley flies into a rage. He's already killed 2 people, he says, and he'd rather kill her than let someone else have her. Poirot turns up in the nick of time, and Rowley is relieved that someone stopped him. This scene is why this is one of my favorite Poirot stories. He just walked in on an attempted murder, and he takes charge so easily. It's also funny. Rowley keeps trying to tell him, "I just tried to kill Lynn, arrest me." And Poirot's like, "Shut up, go sit down." David turns up too, and Poirot gives the 3 of them the solution to the mystery. When Rowley went to see Jeremy, he saw a photograph of Francis's father, who bore a resemblance to the man calling himself Arden, though in the film they simplified it and just made it a photo of Charles. Realizing what was going on, he went to Charles and raged at him, and accidentally killed him. He used the fire tongs to frame David. Rowley himself contacted Major Porter and bribed him, then hired Poirot to find him. Poirot says he should have realized this when somehow Porter knew Rowley didn't smoke. Porter is the second death Rowley blames himself for putting him in that position. It was Rowley who took away the suicide note. The woman seen in the victim's room was actually David. He'd come earlier to pay the blackmail and found the man dead. He used the disguise, and Lynn, to fake an alibi. Now, remember that clue I mentioned earlier? When David said to Rosaline, "Stick to your story about the dead man not being Underhay." It would have made more sense for David to either say, "Keep telling the truth," or to say, "Don't tell the truth that the dead man really is Underhay." But he did neither of these things. Why? Because neither of them knew whether the dead man was Underhay. Because the real Rosaline Claude died with Gordon in the explosion. This is an impostor. The gossip had us believing that David wasn't Rosaline's brother, but it distracted us from all the little hints all along that Rosaline wasn't really his sister. It's brilliant. David realized Rosaline was growing a conscience, so he killed her to keep her from giving the scheme away. He'd get access to the money again once he married Lynn. So out of the 3 deaths, only one of them was murder, and it happened just a chapter or 2 ago. That is nuts. I love it. But wait a minute. If Rosaline was the only actual murder victim, and if Rosaline doesn't die in the film, does that mean there's a Poirot film with no murders?
Everybody lives!
But today, mes amis, Poirot shall produce a murderer of whose viciousness he stands in awe.
Okay, I'm intrigued. We'll get to that in just a moment. First, let's wrap up the book. Spence arrests David for the murders of Rosaline and Charles, believing David is guilty of that death too. In the end, Lynn decides to go ahead and marry Rowley, stating that she loves him and is okay with not feeling safe around him, which maybe isn't the healthiest choice, but I like to think of it as symbolic of her learning to adjust to post-war life. All right, I'm ready. The first thing I want to address is the scene where Rosaline says the dead man is not her husband, and goes on to describe Underhay. In the book, the very fact that she was unable to tell Poirot any details about him was the confirmation he needed in order to know that she was not who she said she was. This embellishment flies directly in the face of that. The next thing is how Lynn's breakup with Rowley is turned into a variation on the "it's not you, it's me" cliché. Actually, you know what? There's just too much to complain about. Let's just skip to the big stuff. Catherine is the one doing the obscene phone calls, which was pretty obvious and didn't advance the plot any. Lionel is also a drug addict, which is actually book accurate, and he stole from Rosaline's supply, which is why she didn't die. The clue hinting that Porter has met Rowley before is changed, but it doesn't work because... who cares? Poirot takes everyone back to the day Gordon Claude died.
Dynamite.
What?
The premeditated explosion of a bomb. A device built and operated by you, David Hunter.
Uh-huh. I don't suppose it occurred to the screenwriter that the title, Taken at the Flood, refers to someone taking advantage of a fortuitous situation. But if David caused the explosion, he's not seizing an opportunity, he's creating an opportunity. Well, anything else?
You had seduced her, impregnated her, and that had the baby disposed of.
Whoa.
She endured abortion, as it was always your intention that she should. You wanted to crush the very soul of this simple Catholic girl.
Oh boy. So, I get that the point is that David is cruel, and he used someone's religious beliefs to convince her she's evil so that she'd do his bidding. But considering what's going on today, at best, this is tone-deaf. Abortion is a complicated issue, but it's just thrown in here with no precedent for the sake of upping the drama. I'm by no means an expert on the issue, but I do know that at its core is the right to bodily autonomy. Somehow, I don't think that's what they were stressing here. There's something after that about David threatening to blow everyone up with more dynamite, but whatever. I'm done. Sorry to end on a downer. This one really left a bad taste in my mouth. We'll have more fun next time.